All right, so the new album, Grimoire of Oak and Shadow, is finally here. And thanks to all of you, we've had a tremendous response. So before we get started with this Q&A session, let's have a big round of applause for everybody who showed up today. Eh? How about, oh, shit. Here we go. Okay, so you submitted some questions, and I am about to submit some answers. Without further ado, let's dive right in, shall we? Any bands that gave you inspiration for your music? Of course. The early ones, when I first started this project a couple decades ago, were Cradle of Filth, Dimmu Borgir, In Flames, Soilwork, Dream Theater, Typo Negative, Opeth, Archerus, Anathema. The list just keeps going on and on. But those were the basic ones that I tried to emulate when I started recording. And that's okay to copy others when you get started in music, because you basically find what you like, you try to figure out how they do that, and from that you develop your own style, hold on to that style, and push it throughout your career. What was your favorite Halloween costume as a kid or as an adult? Well, considering the fact that I dressed up as the Crow for a good solid 10 years starting in the 90s, I'm going to stick with that. If you could only listen to one artist or band for the rest of your life, who would it be? Tom Waits. Only because his back catalog and his collection of albums is just so diverse, and aside from being one of the most influential songwriters of our time, and I know a lot of people think he sounds like a monster with nails in his throat, but he's just so influential and so unique. Each album skips a different style, so one album will sound like a homeless guy playing a dumpster out back, which he actually did, funny enough. He put piano strings on a dumpster and played it, but that's a whole other story. And another album will just be this really mellow jazz album. So he's very diverse and unique, and I appreciate that. So I'll definitely stick with Tom Waits. Which do you consider the most romantic song you've ever written and the darkest? Well, romantic, I can't really tell you because I don't really write romantic songs unless... I shouldn't even get into this, but since we're here, why the hell not? So, a very long time ago, a few, years back, I was dating a girl and I wrote an album for her, and she's probably watching this, you know who you are. And the songs were very lovey-dovey. I used to rhyme her name with certain words, and it was just really corny and kind of embarrassing. They were only meant for her ears, until one time when I was on a ride with some friends. We were in the car and happened to be smoking the devil's lettuce. And we picked up these two metalheads whom I didn't know personally, but my friends knew. And they were really intense guys. They got into the car. My friends were like, yeah, you should check out some of Dan's work. He's a metal musician. And they were like, oh yeah? Let's hear what you got. So I don't know how, but they got a hold of that album of corny songs I wrote for my girlfriend at the time, and they played them for these rough and tough metalheads. Needless to say, that was a very interesting reaction. Moving on, and the darkest song I've ever written? What's Left of Flesh, off the album Surrender the Fire. That is a very catchy ditty about dismembering a corpse by dragging it across rocks that are wrapped in barbed wire and putting razor blades in between each one of your teeth and forcing your jaw shut, wholesome stuff. Any end-of-year goals or things you hope to accomplish before New Year's? I definitely want to collaborate with another artist on a visual medium, such as like a t-shirt, a hoodie maybe, a poster, bed sheets, coffee mugs, something. Just collaborate with another artist in that regard. Back in 2017, I did it with an artist that went by the name Sorrow Grips, and he was out of Indonesia. I found him via the band Gojira. He had done some artwork for them, and in turn ended up doing the artwork for Ending Life Slowly. It was such a great experience. He did like pen and ink stuff, and I had him do a t-shirt after that. I was so impressed with the cover art he did, so he did a t-shirt, some promo material. That was a great experience. More recently, I worked with Joe Sinner, a great tattoo artist from overseas. He helped me do the shirt for this latest album, Grimoire of Oak and Shadow, You can get that shirt at autumnseyes.com, by the way, shameless self-promotion. But some type of collaboration with another artist would be great. How do you keep your hair so beautiful? And what is your take on this generation's alternative music? Any bands that stick out to you? I don't really consider my hair anything other than a pile of slop that sits on my head, and it's ridiculously difficult to manage, especially in the summertime when it's hot and sweaty. So I wash it a lot. I flat iron the out of it, because if I don't, I look like Doc Brown from Back to the Future, and that's not a good look. And I use a product called Ghost Oil. It's not just a spooky name, it's an actual thing, so check it out. What was the other part of the question? Alternative music. I don't really digest music the same way I used to, especially in my younger days in the 90s when alternative music was so huge. It was on movies, TV shows, radio. You couldn't escape it. It was everywhere. Whether it was big bands like Nirvana or Smashing Pumpkins, or even bands that kind of flew under the radar like Pixies and Melvins. They were still awesome, equally as good as the big bands, but that was a different era, so I can't really comment on today's era because I don't really keep up with it. But if you do have any suggestions, please let me know. I'm open to all sorts of music these days. How long does it take you to write a song? Well, there's a lot of variables that go into that. You could take a song like Death of October, which I remember vividly writing in my kitchen as I was scrubbing dishes. It was Halloween time, and there was a melody that popped into my head where I was sitting there going... This is me scrubbing, by the way. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I had to hold on to that idea, carefully go downstairs, because it was like carrying, glass. You didn't want to drop anything or forget anything. Went into the studio, fired up the computer, the keyboard, found the notes, layered drums on it, bass, guitar, vocals, and then boom, song was done. So that was like lightning in a bottle. Then you have other songs like the entirety of this new album, Grimoire of Oak and Shadow, which started off as regular heavy metal songs and kind of transformed into its own beast. Those elongated into year-long projects because of all the stuff that was going on in my life at the time. It became more of a therapy vessel than anything, so it depends. Some songs can take an hour, some songs can take years. What movies, shows, or books would you say shaped this album? Movies, shows, or books? Movies, definitely Interview with the Vampire. That's always a big one. The soundtrack to that album is just so fucking beautiful. I can't get over it. To this day, I listen to it all the time. Claudia's theme. I mean, look up Claudia's theme from Interview and just tell me that's not one of the most beautiful pieces of music you've ever heard. Shows and books? Probably that Sandman series that came out on Netflix. That was a cool one. I had not been familiar with that up until that came out, which in turn led me to read the books as well. And both the Sandman books and the series were so cool and inspired a lot of what I was doing with this new album. What inspired you to finally get this album completed versus procrastinating? So I started writing this new album, Grimoire of Oak and Shadow, in 2018. And to be honest with you, I could have released this in 2019, 2020, but as you know, 2020 was an absolute shit show. So that kind of put things on pause for a little while. On top of that, there was a lot of emotional factors at play. I became a father for the first time. My mother passed away. Soon after that, my father got cancer. We lost our family dog of like 14 years. So there was a lot of emotional weight behind that. And in turn, that took these regular songs and transformed them into therapy vessels where I would get a call on the phone, mom's in the hospital again, she's sick. I'd go downstairs, put the headphones on, and I would start re-recording guitar parts that were already recorded. They did not need to be recorded again. I just felt so safe in that musical space, and it was so therapeutic to me that I almost used it like a drug. It was very addictive. So it got to the point where the album, you couldn't squeeze anything else out of it. And I knew it was done. I could feel that it was done. And in order to open another door, I had to close that door. Any prior works you would compare this album to that we should revisit before listening to it? No. How is Connecticut? How is the family? How is your son? Are you enjoying being a dad? Well, Connecticut is fantastic. I am not going to complain in that department because I love seasons. I love strong seasons, and New England has all of that. So summer is very hot. The beaches are great. When fall hits, it's nice and cold. The trees just change colors so intensely that it's almost like they're on fire. I mean, the hues of rust and red and orange and yellow, it just drapes the canopies with so much light and color and contrast. That's why I fell in love with the season so much, which in turn inspired me to start Autumn's Eyes. And then you have winter, which for a black metal fan is just fantastic as well, because it's cold, it's icy, it's almost like Norway in a sense, where everything is just frozen over and dead. Then spring hits, and it's all rejuvenation and this beautiful transitional season, which leads back into summer, and the whole process repeats itself again. How is your family? Family's great, can't complain there. Don't usually talk about that, but, they're good. How is your son? He's fantastic. Little ball of energy. Are you enjoying being a dad? Well, yeah, I am. There's not really a day that goes by where I can't think of that kid and get an enormous smile on my face. I can remember when he was born, leading up to him being born, I never had a driver's license. My entire life, went my whole life without a driver's license. I was absolutely terrified to get behind the wheel. Just massive anxiety. I'm talking sweating, foot vibrating on the gas pedal, just couldn't do it. And I remember when my wife told me she was pregnant, I was like, all right, that's it. I got to get a license because you can't take care of your kid without a car, even though I contemplated how. I knew I had to get a car, so I would practice. And by that, I would drive to the stop sign, get nervous, turn around, go back home. Next day, I would drive to the stop sign, go a little bit further, get nervous, turn around, go home, and I would keep going a little bit further and further and further until I made my way to the highway. And I said, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm not going to drive on the highway yet. There's plenty of time. There's like 3 weeks left until he's due. I'll practice highway stuff and get it down, and I'll be ready to go before he's born. But later that day, my wife was outside with the dog, and she peeked her head in the front door, and she said, Dan, can you get me a towel? I was like, yeah, sure. Got her a towel. I'm like, why? What's up? Dog piss on the carpet? And she's like, no, I think my water just broke. And I was like, oh. Just froze instantly right there. I'm thinking, your water can't break. You're not due for another 3 weeks. I have to do highway driving. I have to practice. It's not time yet, but it was time. And cut to me, white knuckling it on the highway, just all the way to Hartford Hospital. Made our way there, and gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. We were there for a few days, and I remember we got back. We were sitting in our driveway, got out of the car. My wife and I are looking at each other, holding this little potato. And I remember just thinking, what the hell do we do now? Because nobody ever tells you, what to do, how to raise a kid. You just got to kind of figure it out. And because I had gone through all that stress with the driving and learned how to push through that stuff, it helped me learn how to become a better parent. And in turn, that was just such a rewarding experience. So when you ask, do I enjoy being a dad? Absolutely. It's transformed who I am as a person, and I couldn't ask for a better life because of it. He's just an absolute blessing. Will you ever get some hired guns and do a tour with a full band? I've been asked that a lot throughout my career with Autumn's Eyes, and I would love to do it only if it was something that happened organically and naturally. I'm not the type of guy to go out and seek out, hired guns and pay them just to put on a show. I worked with some great musicians back in the day, one of which helped shape this band tremendously. And by that, I mean, he was not only a great friend to me, he was such an essential part of helping me shape the sound of Autumn's Eyes, to where he was a drummer, I was a guitar player. I would come up with a riff, and we had such a symbiotic relationship where he would know exactly what to put underneath that riff, and he would know what would come after that riff. He would say, you should do something like this or like that, and he would tell me what was great, what was garbage. It was just such a great partnership, and I miss him so much to this day. I don't know what happened to him. He fell off the face of the planet, but if you're out there, you little bastard, you better contact me. So if I was able to find another musician like that, I would do it in a heartbeat. If you could write an album based off any book, what would it be? Not the Bible, not a cookbook, maybe a cookbook. No, not a cookbook. I don't know, probably that Sandman series. That would be a pretty cool concept album. Somebody's probably already done that though. That would be a really long album. Let's see. Will the new album have any old sounds or new sounds? Well, definitely some old sounds because I will be singing on it and I am getting old. New sounds, absolutely, especially in the synthesizer department. So when I record an album, what I do is I layer drums, bass guitar, electric guitar, keyboards, vocals. And typically the keyboard tracks are like, I don't know, 1 or 2 synthesizers, orchestra emulation, something real basic. This time around, I went freaking bonkers. I was layering strings, choirs, bells, Asian instruments, African instruments, all sorts of world instruments to create this different landscape that I've never really approached before. And I did that because I always loved albums growing up where you could listen 10 times over, and each time you would listen, you would hear something different in one ear, or something would pop up in another ear when you had headphones on. So I wanted to try and create that experience for the listener. Out of everything you released, what album do you think is your best and why? Surrender the Fire, because that's the first album I did when things kind of got legit with Autumn's Eyes as far as promotional material goes. That was the first music video I ever shot for Feast of the Dead, which ended up on MTV2. It got a great response, and that was what started me doing more appearances at like horror movie conventions. I ran a lot of contests, one of which I partnered with BC Rich Guitars and gave away a free guitar. So that was where things just really started gaining momentum and building a fan base with Autumn's Eyes. What do you find to be the most difficult part of the writing process? And what is a song that has been your favorite to listen to from the ones you've written so far? As far as the writing process goes, that's not really the difficult part. That's kind of like being a kid playing with your action figures, just seeing what goes together. And the difficult part comes when the recording process starts, because that's when your technical ability has to shine. Early on, I recorded on a 4-track recorder, and it was just really sloppy, really messy. The more I did it, though, the more practice I got, the better I got at it, to the point where now I know what exercises I need to do to prepare my voice before doing some screaming vocals, for example. And those take a very, very large toll on your throat. You have to have a good technique so that you don't blow your voice out in the first song. So those are the difficult aspects of recording, not so much the writing process. And what is a song that has been my favorite to listen to from the ones I've written so far? It depends on my mood, really, just like any music that I listen to. I love all the songs I've written. That's why I write them. I'm my biggest fan. That might sound egotistical, but I don't give a shit, because that's why I write music. I love listening to it as much as I love recording it. Which one do I love right now? I mentioned it earlier, Death of October, because I have a big urge to get to Halloween. I am not sick of the summer. I'm not going to celebrate Halloween in July. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I have a very strong urge to get those Halloween vibes going, and that song really gets them going for me. What made you want to create in the first place? Well, that's easy. I come from a creative family. My mom was a piano player, a flute player. She loved to cook. That's how I learned to cook. She was big into arts and crafts. She got me into arts and crafts. We even had a room downstairs in the basement that was just devoted to Mom's arts and crafts stuff, like painting supplies, craft supplies, whatever. Right next door to that was my father's garage. He was a big-time carpenter, craftsman, always building stuff around the house. He was big into music as well, a lot of jazz, a lot of oldies, a lot of AC/DC. I have 2 sisters, one of which runs her own cosmetics company. The other sister, every holiday, we would have a get-together, and the first thing we would talk about is what did she bake for the holiday dessert. Was always some crazy concoction she would come up with off the top of her head, and it was always delicious. My brother runs his own graphic design company, so that's probably why I do what I do today, because of that big creative family that influenced me to be so creative. Are you single? Unless my wife has something to... No, I am not single. Okay. If you walked into your house and there were tons and tons of birds, what would you do? Well, right off the bat, I can tell you I would laugh very maniacally, because I have this innate ability to laugh at the most inopportune times, and I happen to have a very loud and obnoxious laugh, which sometimes makes people plug their ears. So that's most likely how I would react in that situation. Why the sucks in your page name? I assume you're referring to my Instagram handle, Autumn's Eyes Music Sucks. Well, it's because A, I'm a smartass. B, I couldn't figure out anything else to use because Autumn's Eyes was already taken by some jackass. Kidding. And C, it's just kind of an homage to bands like Typo Negative and Primus, who you would go to one of their shows and the audience would always be chanting, "You suck, you suck." So that's pretty much why. What kind of philosophy do you identify with the most and has been a major shift in your thinking? And did it overall affect your lyrical content of the music you produced so far? Wow, that was a mouthful. Let me think. So this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I was kind of into drugs when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. I was fortunate enough to where that stuff didn't really take hold like it did with some of my friends whom I've lost over the years to that stuff, because addiction can be a real bitch. But I was very lucky to not have that as a big issue in my life, and that stuff kind of just faded away. But when I was in the throes of it, especially in my early 20s, I started messing around with LSD. And that's when, up until that point, I was a big stoner, writing songs about Lord of the Rings, girls, whatever, corny stuff. Then I did LSD and it was like, wow, just opened my mind up. And that's when I thought more about the weight behind my words and using that to my advantage, especially in my lyrics. What are your favorite movies that inspire your music? Definitely horror movies. Not horror movies. That would be a whole different style of music. That would be like a style of music. I'm talking about horror movies. Horror. 80s, 70s, 90s, whatever. My bread and butter is like 80s. Slasher stuff. Freddy, Jason, Chucky, Michael Myers. I grew up watching that stuff on TV all the time. Even sitting in front of the TV with a keyboard that we had in the house, trying to figure out note by note how they did the Season of the Witch soundtrack. And that had a big influence on the music I do with Autumn's Eyes today. What are your favorite tracks on the new album as far as lyrical or personal or musicality? Well, Sorrow and Sunlight I will always hold close to the heart just because that's about my experience losing my mother. But Follow the Embers is a very special song to me, only because that's the first one I wrote for this album where it felt like I really had something to work with there. And it's an interesting story about how that came together, especially the ending of that song. So I originally intended to end the song with this big guitar solo, but I had no clue what to play there. I was trying blues licks, I was trying John Petrucci licks, I was trying everything I could possibly think of to put in that ending guitar solo, but I could not for the life of me figure out what to play. And it got to the point where things were so frustrating because of what was going on with my mother at the time. She was sick and she was on her last legs, she was back in the hospital, and I remember I was out getting a haircut and I was in the parking lot about to go in. My sister called and she says, "We're going to be putting Mom in hospice care." At the time, I didn't realize what that meant. I just kind of blanked out and all my frustration disappeared and I was just a zombie. And I went in to get my hair cut. It happened to be a trainee who was cutting my hair, and she asked, "How short do you want it?" And I just went, "I don't know, here." And she's like, "Okay," and chopped away at my hair, and she did an awful job. It was all crooked when I got home, but I wasn't really paying attention because I wasn't in the moment. I was totally taken aback from what my sister told me, because hospice care means that's where you go to die, basically. So I kind of put music on the back burner for a couple of weeks leading up to her passing away, which then was this moment of ultimate clarity and a big weight lifted off of my shoulders after she passed. And that's when I went back to music. And the first song I loaded back up was Follow the Embers. And I plugged my guitar in, I went right back to that spot where the guitar solo was, and hit record. The first thing that came out is what you hear on the song today. The first take is what poured out like a faucet. I don't know why or how, but it's a great example of how music and emotion can kind of reflect what's going on in your own life and produce something that's just so unique. Otherwise, I would have just been sitting there noodling around trying to come up with an idea empty-handed. So that lent itself to my creative process and in turn created a song that I will forever love. And if you have any inclination of pursuing music of any sort, whether it be metal, rock, acoustic, songwriting, country, rap, whatever it is, even if it's not music, if it's art of some sort, painting, building something, whatever it is, anything creative, if you're going to do it, put yourself 100% into it. I talked about earlier copying other people to find your own style. That's cool. But when you find your style, hold on to that and use that to feed your momentum. And if you're scared, if you're anxious, if you're intimidated, that just means you're going in the right direction. So instead of avoiding that fire and walking around it, walk straight through it. Just like that driving story I was talking about earlier. It took little baby steps to get to the point where now I absolutely love driving. So if you're afraid, intimidated, whatever, work through it and use that to your advantage. I'm telling you, it will make you a stronger person. It will give you much more confidence. And that's what we need as a culture to absorb and digest music in a way that's more original. We don't need to hear, who can play the fastest on Instagram or who can sound the most like this person over here. There's enough copycats and clones out there doing everything that's been done before, but there's not enough of you out there. So if you find yourself compelled to join some sort of creative field, put yourself into it 100%. All right, that about wraps things up. I want to thank everybody for their support. The new Autumn's Eyes album, Grimoire of Oak and Shadow, is available right now. And I need to take a minute to tell you why I appreciate your support so much, because I don't really put much attention into the marketing numbers for these things. I kind of just do an album, put it out, and let it do its thing. This time around, I paid a little bit more attention. And prior to this album, let's take my Spotify streams, for example. I was getting maybe a couple hundred Spotify streams per month with all my albums combined. When this album came out, in just this past month, just this album alone has been streamed front to back over 10,000 times. So for somebody like me who's not selling out stadiums, I don't have the biggest fan base out there, that's pretty awesome. And that's because of you all out there who are helping me share this and spread the word. So once again, thank you so much from the bottom of my black little heart. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time and I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.